Everyone knows how Pompeii died. A mountain woke up, the sky turned black. A Roman city was swallowed whole and frozen mid-scream, preserved under ash for 17 centuries. The villain is right there in the name we give it, Vesuvius. And that's true, the volcano did kill this city. But if you stand in the ruins of one particular house and look at the bones the way forensic scientists finally did in 2024, you find something the postcard version leaves out. Vesuvius wasn't the only thing that killed them that day. To understand the second killer, you have to understand the first one wasn't fast. When the eruption began, it didn't bury Pompeii in an instant. For roughly 18 hours, the mountain rained pumice, light, porous stone, falling at 15 to 20 centimeters an hour. Terrifying, loud. The weight of it caved in roofs, but survivable if you ran, and most people did. Out of an estimated population of 11 to 15,000, the majority appear to have escaped during this long fall. The deaths, in the end, number only in the low thousands. This was the window. Then the pumice stopped. Imagine that silence. The roar of falling stone simply ends, and a survivor, crouched inside a house, thinks the worst is over. It isn't. In that narrow window, after the pumice fall had ended, but before the first wave of superheated gas reached the city, the ground itself began to move. In the house of the painters at work, archaeologists found two men, both over 55, not burned, crushed. They had been overwhelmed by collapsing walls. And the way those walls failed tells the story. A partition didn't sink straight down under the weight of ash. It sheared sideways along a horizontal break partway up the wall, then toppled out of plane. Not the downward press of volcanic debris, a sideways shearing motion, the signature of an earthquake. And the rock layers locked the moment in time. The collapse sits in the sediment after the pumice had stopped falling, but before the first surge swept through. One of those men had more than 20 rib fractures on each side of his chest. Fractures to his face, the base of his skull, his pelvis, severe compression trauma. The second man lay differently, huddled on his side, an arm raised over his head, both bones of one forearm broken, the posture of someone bracing as a building came down on him. The researchers describe it bluntly: injuries analogous to modern earthquake victims, not the marks of heat, the marks of being crushed. At least 2 confirmed cases in this one house. This is the unseen cause. In 2024, a study in Frontiers in Earth Science, led by Domenico Sparris, identified earthquakes striking during the eruption as an additional cause of building collapse and death. Earthquakes, the volcano's louder story, had buried for nearly 2,000 years. How violent were they? The study estimates these earthquakes at around magnitude 6. But notice that word, estimated. No instruments existed to measure them. That number is inferred from the damage itself, read backward out of the ruins. A careful guess, not a measurement. We owe you that distinction. And here is where honesty matters more than drama. The earthquakes did not replace the volcano. They joined it. The thing that killed most of Pompeii's victims was the volcano's second act: pyroclastic surges, superheated clouds of gas and ash, moving faster than anyone could outrun, around 250 to 300 degrees Celsius at Pompeii, that brought death in seconds. The surges still did most of the killing. You've seen the plaster casts, the huddled figures, arms raised, bodies contorted, long read as the agony of slow suffocation. But the forensic science tells a colder story. Those postures are heat shock, muscles contracting instantly, locking the body at the moment of death by a heat so sudden there was never time to struggle. Not a slow fight for air, an instant. At Herculaneum, closer in, the surges reached roughly 500 degrees. There, the heat was hot enough to vaporize flesh outright. So why were they so unprepared? Because the Romans did not see Vesuvius as a volcano. They knew volcanoes existed. Etna burned to the south. But this mountain had been quiet for centuries, its slopes covered in vineyards. They regarded it as an ordinary, dormant landmark. And there had been a warning they couldn't read. A powerful earthquake in 62 or 63 AD had already damaged the city. 17 years later, the repairs were still underway. Temples, baths, and homes still under scaffolding. The walls were already weak when the ground moved again. Almost everything we know in writing comes from one teenager watching from across the bay. Pliny the Younger at Misenum, about 30 kilometers away. He described the eruption cloud as a Mediterranean pine tree, a tall trunk of ash spreading into branches at the top, and gave us the word Plinian. His uncle sailed toward the disaster to help, and died. And in his letters, Pliny recorded the ground shaking so hard that buildings seemed to be torn from their foundations. But he wrote those letters to the historian Tacitus roughly 25 years later, from memory, from a distance. Even our witness was looking from far away, which is why we date the eruption to August. Traditionally, though autumn fruits, heavier clothing, and heating braziers found in the woods the volcano opened a window, 18 hours in which most of Pompeii walked free. And then, in the quiet before the killing heat, the earth shook and helped close it. The surges were the executioner. But the earthquakes, the study suggests, were the overlooked accomplice, collapsing the shelters people trusted and possibly shaping the final fatal choices of those deciding whether to run or stay. The villain was never just the mountain. It was the mountain and the ground beneath it, working together while no one was watching. That's the pattern we chase here. The cause you were taught is rarely the whole cause. Next time, a disaster everyone blames on human error, until you look at what the clocks were actually doing. This has been The Unseen Cause.